Welcome to Recovery Radio by Landmark Recovery with your host, Zach Crouch. In this program, we'll discuss the root causes and treatments of alcohol and substance addiction, speak with experts in related fields, and help navigate the road to recovery. Now, here's the host of Recovery Radio, Zach Crouch.
Hi, I'm Zach Crouch, and you're listening to Landmark Recovery Radio, your source for addiction and recovery news and knowledge. You can find us online wherever you get your podcast, and don't forget to subscribe to get the most up-to-date information from leading experts. We have guest Fred Muench joining us on the show today. Fred is the president of Center on Addiction and the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. Following research that's shown short-term text intervention has a positive effect on changing drinking habits, the partnership has partnered with the Feinstein Institutes for Medical Research to launch Project TAMMI, which stands for the Text Assessment and Mobile Messaging Intervention. Fred will be explaining how TAMMI works and who can benefit from the program. Fred, thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on the show with us today. It really means a lot.
Zach, thanks so much for having me on and for doing the work you do.
So tell us about TAMMI. How does TAMMI actually work?
Sure. So TAMMI is a text messaging intervention for people who are interested in moderating their drinking. And there's a number of ways to sign up, but essentially anybody can text moderate to 55753, okay, and they can start the process. Because it's a study, we have to do consent, and there are some forms that people fill out before they get started. They do get reimbursed for that. And then they're randomized into one of three groups. And then based on the group they're in, they'll get different kinds of text messages. And so over the period of time, what we're looking at is whether text messages over time, which range from drink tracking, which has been shown to be very effective for people who want to moderate, to more intensive interventions and messaging, will change people's drinking. And our initial results, we did a short-term study of 3 months, and it was shown that all groups actually did quite well in reducing their drinking, in some ways similar to in-person therapy, not necessarily formal treatment, but in-person therapy.
That's pretty impressive. So I'm curious to know, just in terms of your all study here with moderation, is abstinence also part of this as well? Is that something that you guys are tracking, and how does that play into your project?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the reason we started with moderation was because of safety. And we know that based on the severity of alcohol or substance use problem, the more severe, the more likely you need more intervention, and particularly more in-person intervention. So our intervention is a very low lift, and it's not an intensive therapy. So we purposefully excluded individuals who may need more care. We were also worried about individuals with high problem drinking, so with greater severity, because this is a remote automated intervention. There's no in-person contact. The potential for withdrawal, for example, is significant, and we didn't want to encourage non-drinking when someone might go into withdrawal. So as part of our study, we're very intentional about making sure that those with more severe problems are referred out and are not put in the study. And if you're seeking abstinence, what we do is we provide other solutions, because there are other online solutions for people who are looking at abstinence, whether it's 12-step meetings online, which are exploding now because of COVID, or Smart Recovery. There's a lot of great self-help resources online. But what we do make sure of is, if someone's in the study and they're deemed safe to be in the study, that if they do want to try abstinence, that we're willing and able and will help them achieve that goal.
Got it. So with this project, then it brings up a question for me then. Who is a good, or, who is the prime candidate for this particular project?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's people who are drinking, it's almost like a classic. So if we look at our initial study, it's probably the best way to frame it, is people who are drinking maybe a little less than a bottle of wine at dinner or a night, or 4 or 5 beers. What we're seeing is people, the average number of drinks per week was around 22. But we let people in who want to moderate their drinking, so they could be binge drinking one night a week. They're going out Friday night and they're drinking 12 drinks and they want to stop that. We let people in the study who are drinking 30 drinks a week but are not at risk for alcohol withdrawal. And what we do is we exclude those who have more severe problems.
Okay.
And the best candidates for moderation are individuals who fall in that middle range, who don't want abstinence. And that's an important point.
Sure it is.
There's research to show that forcing abstinence or an abstinence goal on someone who's not ready for it will backfire. But if you work with someone who wants to moderate and you work with them where they are, that if they're not able to do it, that's a great indicator that moderation's probably not a good fit for them.
Absolutely.
They should try abstinence.
Got it. Wow. So these folks that how many people have come through this particular study so far?
So right now we're in the initial phases. About 70 people are in the study. So we're excited. We're going to try to get as many people as we can. Awesome.
And tell us, I mentioned during the intro at least, the Feinstein Institute for Medical Research. What do they do?
So the Feinstein Institute is a great research institution, and they'll do everything from behavioral interventions like the study we are conducting with addiction, with mental health issues, anything on psychotherapy, remote-based digital interventions, to basic science research and understanding inflammatory responses in humans and ensuring to increase immune function. So it's a state-of-the-art research institution with capabilities from psychotherapy to basic biology.
Got it. I'm curious too, just within your study here, the Project TAMMI study, is there a particular age group that you're focusing on, or is this just all over the board?
It's all over the board, and what we found is, sometimes depending on the recruitment source, but overall, we're finding that more women are engaging in this type of remote-based intervention than men.
Interesting.
And the age varies from 24 to 40, but everyone, we have about 25% of our sample were over 50, for example. And we're seeing a large increase in the number of people who want to moderate their drinking after they retire, for example, which is a big problem because people have all this free time and no responsibility.
Yeah.
So they start drinking heavily. They don't necessarily have a genetic predisposition, but they want to figure out a way to moderate. So we're really targeting that more than social drinker, that person who you're not too worried about, but you're like, they could
be on the edge. Yeah, for sure. Well, that's interesting that you bring up there's more women engaged in the study. I find that interesting because typically, certainly within our facility here in Louisville, Kentucky at Landmark Recovery, there is anywhere from I'd say 60 to 70%, probably 60% are men in the facility at any given time. Do you have any thoughts on that? Why if more women are engaged in this study?
So a few thoughts, and it is a juxtaposition to the traditional treatment centers. One reason is because of childcare, fewer women enter treatment. Well, let's start with that fewer women have significantly more severe problems. Men typically have more severe substance use problems in terms of severity. Also, that we've seen a significant rise in alcohol use amongst women in the past 15 years. So there are more women who are struggling with alcohol use. Women are typically the ones who are caring for the family. And there's a lot of shame and stigma, particularly with women, around substance misuse. And so confidential care where they can go on with their lives and focus on this and get support remotely is attractive.
It's a huge thing.
It's a huge thing. And, with that is understanding that, sometimes people need more. And that's one of the things about our intervention with, as we target, for example, we're not asking people to go into treatment. In fact, in the study, if you're going into treatment, we don't think you should be in the study because you want to focus on your treatment. But what we do find is that, as the women or anybody in the study, as they start to think and they start to get messages, some of them make decisions to go seek more formal treatment. And that's one of the unique things is we're really meeting them where they are and help guiding them on a journey. And for women, it very often comes into play is understanding some of the risk factors they might not have thought about, as well as understanding that they should take care of themselves, not just their family members or those around them, which many women tend to do.
Which is tough, man. That's like a culturally ingrained message anyway. I mean, we're in the 21st century today, but still, if you polled people today in households, where there's kids and spouses and partners that, your traditional marriage, of a man and woman together, you're going to find that, the women are the people taking care of the kids.
Yeah. And even in the most progressive households, you typically see, there's even a divide there, even when men think they're doing more, they're doing less. It's the women who are really carrying the burden of the household responsibilities. And
most women are working today. So
yeah, that's right. So they're doing both. That's right.
They absolutely are. So let me ask a question. So if you find someone who's at that edge where this study is not being helpful for them, in other words, they're not moderating their drinking, they're using excessively more and more, is there a conversation that your folks have with them or someone else?
We do. We have our research team. If they're not doing well, our research team will reach out to them.
Okay.
Now we do say to them, if you're having trouble or need to reach out to us. If after a certain period of time we're concerned, we will also reach out. We haven't had that because we are enrolling people without serious problems to begin with. So we're not getting that as much, but sure, if people need help. So one of the things we say is if you ever want to talk to somebody in the study, you can type in talk and chat with a research assistant, and then we mark it down because that could have an effect on the outcome. So one of the things we're doing is, because we're testing all of these various types of interventions, all of which seem to have an effect or do have an effect, but we know that once you start to connect with someone, it throws things off.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the interventions, because I'm curious about what a science-tested text message is. What is it?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, there's a number of different components to the intervention, and I will be purposely slightly vague, if that's okay. I certainly don't want to give away the study, knowing that in previous studies, all components of the intervention were shown to reduce drinking. But I think when we look at it, going back, there's three things that strike me. In terms of how we approach this and what a science-based message is. The first thing we did was we just asked people, what would you want to hear in this situation? What would you want to hear in this situation? What would you want to hear when you go out to a bar and you're worried about drinking too much? What about when you're lonely and you're at home with a bottle of vodka sitting there? What would you like to do?
That's a great question.
So And then we ask people, to write themselves messages. What would you say to yourself in this situation? And then we tried to understand what those messages were. And we rewrote them and thought about, opportunities to make sure. And then what we did was we looked at themes amongst the messages that people wrote themselves. That was the first step. The second step was we created a list of about 50 different types of messages, and we juxtapose them. So we do a gain frame and a loss frame, for example. So the pros of drinking versus the cons of drinking. And I mean the pros of not drinking, so you'll feel healthier, versus the cons, you're going to feel worse. And understanding, and then we looked at, messages with I in them versus we in them. And we took a systematic approach, and we asked people to choose the type of messages they thought were most effective for them. And then lastly, what we did was we dove into the literature, and we looked at the in-person literature, and we looked at the constructs that are most important in why people drink and why people change. And we built the intervention around those three components. And most importantly is, if you look at the literature, probably one of the most important things is drink tracking. And there are studies that show, and a study we even did, that drink tracking alone, just tracking your drinks weekly, that reminder can make a huge difference in reducing your drinking.
Well, it's like tracking your weight or tracking tracking a fitness schedule of some kind. If you start seeing you're doing it right, absolutely.
Exactly. So we looked at these different components, just really trying to understand. So the interventions in the study will really range, and we focused on all types of messaging that would have an effect. And so as we understand what's working, the goal is to, after the study's over, is to build sort of like a super intervention that is completely personalized, because some person might really just benefit and want drink tracking, and that's what they're going to really thrive with, whereas someone might want something that's a little more tailored and personalized with.
So is this kind of getting into a little bit, so to speak, at least as you mentioned, you're taking all this data, you're crunching it, you're trying to create something that's really personalized. Is this sort of algorithmic in nature?
Well, right now it's not too much, but it will be. And that's the goal. That's the goal, is to give people an intervention over time that will meet their individual needs and goals. And one of the things we've learned is that,
just on that topic real quick, Fred, just how many people do you guys want to have come through this?
We'd love to have, up to 1,000.
Okay.
We're trying to get as many people as we can in this intervention. We really want to optimize remote-based care, because the beautiful thing about this is we can make it free, and we don't want to compete with treatment. We in fact recommend to people, if they're not doing well, to go to treatment. We want to provide a guide for people, and we're keeping track of everything people do outside the intervention as well. But we'd like to get as many people. And we think the opportunity for this, particularly if we have a combined moderation program and an abstinence program for people who are currently getting care and under supervision, is the way to go to be a self-guided program that's personalized to an individual goal. And that's ultimately where we want to go.
So curious to know too, with that in mind, especially when you have this data and you're helping people, if they need treatment, as an example here, are you guys forming relationships with different treatment facilities and programs across the U.S. as well?
We don't. And what we do is we use, because we are a nonprofit organization, we use just geolocation. We use the SAMHSA treatment finder. For individuals who are looking for therapy, we'll use, local treatment finders. We use Psychology Today. And then what we do is we provide geolocated state data. So we're in New York State, and this is just an example. We would be working with the New York State Office of Substance Services. So, and find them care in their area.
I see. Okay. So just, as we were as we were mentioning earlier, just about this idea of themes that you're looking at among those top three. Are you able to talk about any of those themes that you've come across, or is that something that will be discussed further on?
Yeah, I was saying, Zach, that I'm worried I'm going to give away too much of the secret sauce of it.
Sure.
Yeah, so
sure.
I think ultimately, the main thing to know is that different people respond to different interventions. And what we're really trying to understand is who responds to what and how we can optimize care. And, just like in the in-person literature with, people who want to moderate their drinking, what you see is a 4-session intervention is very often just as good as a 20-session intervention. Right. Now, again, it's very different for abstinence, where you do see like a dose response, that more treatment is good, whether that treatment is outpatient, inpatient, whether that's mutual support, like 12-step groups. The more people are engaged in the change process, the better. With moderated drinking, it's a little different because it's not an all or nothing, but it's a sort of a shift in mindset, and there's certain things that people do. So when people start tracking their drinking, for example, and look at their drinks, they start to engage in all of these different behaviors. So when they go out at night, they're like, you know what? I'm already at 8 drinks this week. I want to stay under 14 drinks. I'm only going to have 2 drinks. Yeah. So they're starting to go into this narrative in their head, right, just based on that number, which is
good because it's making their thought process more conscious at that point.
Exactly.
That's great, man. Very, very cool. Well, does this cost anything to the person that's participating in it?
No, it's entirely free, and in fact, we pay people because it is a study. So the first assessment in terms of how it's set up is that you sign up. The sign up takes, including what we call our baseline interview, that intake interview. All of that takes about an hour. We give you $20, but then you're just getting text messages and then filling out questionnaires every few months, and you get $20 for about a half an hour. So we appreciate the data. We want people to take the time to fill out the surveys because it means so much about what we're going to be able to do with that data and how we're going to be able to help people. And then eventually, the goal is to make this free. We know we manage alcohol site called alcoholscreening.org that gives people feedback on their drinking. So if you're drinking X number of drinks, you get feedback on whether you're at risk and what you can do. And we're going to make that available on the site at some point once the study's over, and we're able to offer it free to everyone in the United States.
That's fantastic, man. So if you have 70 people have already gone through your project here, how long are they participating for? Are these people still participating? How long would they participate for?
Most people are still participating. So they're going to get messages. People get messages for 6 months.
Okay.
So it's a long-term study. This would be the longest term text messaging study ever done with this group. Yeah.
And you began this project, when was it?
We began this project a couple of years ago. So we focused on, the first year was message development. And the last year was really starting with recruitment. And what's fascinating about this is, whereas it was a lot easier to recruit before, we are looking at different strategies and ways to engage people in the study because demographic shifts change, as I mentioned. Like we're realizing we need to target older adults more because there's a huge need there, and that's rapidly changing demographics. Yeah. So it's going to go for another couple of years, and we're excited to get as many people as we can in during this time.
Very, very cool. It'll be interesting, especially to see what's going on with the baby boomer generation. And generations before that. So as far as the data that's on the phone, though, our phones are it seems like just hotbeds for everything because everything's just in our phone now. How is the data stored and protected?
Yeah, it's a great question. So these are just text messages. And so we don't have an app. You sign up and you get text messages. So they're stored like any other text message. So what we do when we sign up, we give people a one page on like how to protect your phone. So do you want to turn off the message preview feature if you're worried? In terms of the number, you can make a contact that put a name on it if you're worried. One of the things we found out that women with kids who look at their phone were worried about it. So, they put on message preview, for example. So making sure that you're taking precautions to protect the messages if you're worried about it. Most people weren't, but some people are. And the other is, unlike Facebook, for example, the data on your phone is AT&T, for example, even though a text message goes through AT&T, for example, or they're not allowed to look at that individual data and then sell that data.
Okay.
So although it's not secure and we let people know it goes through their phone company server and all of that, there's strict privacy rules from those companies to look at content.
Got it. That's reassuring to know that.
Yeah.
And talk to me a little bit more about, your hopes for this project there, now and in the future. You touched on some of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a few hopes. One is that we can make this available nationwide, that we can meet people where they are, and particularly in the person that is just starting to struggle a little bit, and they're seeing they're having a problem, but they're saying to themselves, "Oh, I don't need much. I'm good. I'll be good. I'll be good."
Right.
But to stop that process at that time, to say, here's something that is effortless. You really don't have to do very much. You just have to sign up and then you get messages.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that was most surprising to us in our previous study, which is we asked everybody after the study, we said, you can continue to get messages for another 3 months.
Yeah.
And usually in these trials, you always offer people the ability to continue. And very few people continue after they get the study intervention, for example. 80% of people opted in to continue getting messages. And we're like, you sort of already got most of these messages. They're going to repeat. And the response was, it's a reminder of who I want to be.
Yeah.
It's a reminder. And depending on, certain things of when you get the messages or whatever it might be, it's a reminder of who I want to be at the moment. Or it's a reminder of who I want to be when I'm rethinking about my day and I start to track my drinking.
Sure.
And that is something that is so powerful about simple text messages, is that it's effortless, it's salient, so it's right on your phone. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to open an app. You don't have to do anything else. It reminds you of a goal you have. Sometimes
like a personal trainer or something, right?
Like a personal trainer. And I don't want to, pretend that this is a panacea, because I know it's not.
Sure.
We think of this as sort of like a mild motivational nudge. And we're hoping, when we look at the data of text messages, is that it is an ongoing salient reminder that allows, rather than sort of in a big dose of like I'll compare it to inpatient treatment, right? That has its effects. It's so intense. It's an emotional experience. You're all in. You're learning. And then you need to carry that out into the community. And then you need to follow up and do aftercare or recovery. This is a little bit like almost the exact opposite of a little bit every day, but it never ends. You're getting it every day or once a week or twice a week or whatever that might be, is And what effect does that have on someone, particularly someone who might not need that intense emotional experience and transformational experience of an inpatient or intensive outpatient program?
Would you say, Fred, that most of your folks who go through this are going to talk to someone from the TAMMI project at some point?
Oh,
everyone throughout their time, like, I guess, getting these text messages, or is it, once you're sort of set, you get your text messages, and at that point, if you need help, then great. But for the most part, it's just, or how's it? Yeah.
Yeah. Very few people actually reached out to us in our last study. And even this time, people are, and part of that is the expectation we set up, which is this is an automated messaging program. It doesn't include talking
counseling
to
right.
a counselor. Yeah.
Yeah.
But there is research to show that, text message reminders with counseling also help. So that's the wonderful thing, is that you can completely adapt it. So, for example, at the partnership, we have programs for family members who have loved ones struggling with addiction problems. So our primary focus is only on the family member, usually a parent or caregiver, could be others, but a parent or caregiver. And what we do is we have a range of programs where we're providing people with the opportunity to get these automated messages based on, that their child is struggling with heroin, they're using IV, and they're at risk for overdose, for example. They'll get specific messages. In that program, at any time, because it's not a study, we allow them to type in chat and to chat with a specialist. Only about 14% of people do it. I'm saying about 14% of people seem to do that. So there's a subgroup of people who just want these automated reminders. And then, maybe they'll reach out to a friend, or maybe they'll get therapy elsewhere. Right. And that's okay.
Yeah. Got it. Gosh, man, there's so many questions I want to ask you right now, but I can't. just in terms of, like we talked about, like with the themes piece, and I'm sure that those are things that will, certainly come out in your research that you're doing. Especially around the construct of why people change. I'd be curious to know, more about that as the data kind of comes in. Because there's in our treatment center, at least, we hear a lot from females that kind of nailed on it at the beginning. Large piece of why they change is for their children, and for men, a lot of the times it's their family and especially their job. Get a lot of guys coming into treatment who are on the verge of getting fired or whatever it is. So.
And in general, I don't think it's giving away any of the intervention. Talk about some of the, moderators of why people change. We see the same thing. There's a combination of factors. Usually it's some discrepancy between the consequences of use and some goal or desire they have. And that can be a job, that's family, that's repeated consequences. In many ways, with moderation, usually people have not had the same consequences as someone who should be abstaining, but that's not always true, particularly with binge drinkers. For example, many women struggle because they'll drink and they can be sexually assaulted, or they'll wake up and not remember what happened. Right. So there's a lot of issues that go into this. Older individuals are experiencing health problems. There's interactions with medicines. So when we look at sort of what's happening, it's this discrepancy between their current drinking and their life and how that's interfering with it. And particularly once people become longer term choosers, and we know this from the addiction space, is addiction is a short term and substance use is a short term relief that creates problems in the long term. And once to shift that mindset to be a long-term thinker and focus on regulating in that moment, that's a huge shift for everybody in our program. Got it.
Do you guys do an extensive, so to speak, mental health assessment on the front end with these folks?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it extensive, but we do ask about mental health problems. Okay. We ask about triggers. We ask about craving. We do ask more about depression and emotions. We ask about, their social networks.
Sure.
Do you drink alone? Do you drink with others? When do you drink? Getting at all of these things. And, there's a number of patterns that emerge. Is you have the people who are drinking 25 drinks in a span of 2 or 3 days, and the people who are drinking 25 drinks but they're drinking every day.
Right.
Those are very different types of people. There's people who drink because they're triggered by negative emotion. There's people who drink because they're triggered by positive emotion. And that's one of the things that I think we rarely see in the treatment literature, because once someone gets the treatment, they're already in a state where it's a habit, it's addiction. They're drinking to cope with
usually
negative
physical dependence, right?
Exactly, withdrawal. A lot of the drinkers we have is they go out with their friends and
it's problematic, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
in your all's questionnaire, do you guys bring up any issues around trauma? Like, do you guys talk about any past history of trauma?
We do ask a trauma question, but we don't go into detail about it. And the reason we do is just just making sure we're getting it, because we know.
Sure.
Just like the literature. I mean, it's the overwhelming majority of people with substance abuse. Well, not overwhelming, but about half of people have some history of trauma. Yeah.
Good deal. Well, I am really excited to learn more about this. I've visited and kind of looked over your website, and it looks like you guys are well on your way of getting this. And is there a completion date on this? Have you guys set any sort of timeline?
We'd love to finish recruiting in a year so we can focus on data analysis and get this out. So, the faster, the better. The wonderful thing about this is it's completely scalable, which is if 500 people came in next week, yes, we'd be overwhelmed with our staff, but we could get people up and running. We don't have to schedule appointments the way, an inpatient or a clinic would. So we have this opportunity to bring in lots of people, and we're excited about it. And so the goal is to finish as soon as we can.
That's fantastic. So, Fred, if people are interested, go ahead.
Sorry, just one last thing is this is so low lift that the benefits, the time, versus benefit equation it's effortless. It's easy, effortless. That first appointment is about an hour, but after that, there's very little people have to do.
Doesn't disrupt your daily life at all, really at all. Well, it does. I mean, if you're drinking and you want to moderate,
that's right.
That's not bad. That's a good thing.
Right.
Yeah. So if people are interested and want to learn more about Project TAMMI online, they would go to drugfree.org/TAMMI, correct?
That's right. And they also very simply can text the word moderate to 55753, and then we'll engage them right there. So if you're listening and you want to text moderate to 55753, you can do that. And if you're a family member who has a loved one struggling, you could also just text join to 55753 and get text messages for that too. And that's separate. That's all free and completely separate. That's not for the individual, but that's for family members. And that's something that we make available for free. It's not a study. It's just a service.
I'm so glad to hear that. So when you guys get this published or this research done, how will we know about the Project TAMMI's sort of forward momentum? Do you have any? Can you tell us about what it'll look like next steps after this?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly want to publish a paper, and when the study's over, even prior to publishing the paper, because very often that takes a while. We're going to make this intervention available, and we'll certainly do a press release. And what we'll do is we're going to have this available as part of our larger suite of offerings for free for family members. We're going to make this available for individuals who want to moderate their drinking themselves.
Great. Fred, again, sir, I really do appreciate you coming on the program today.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks so much for having me on. And
it's been very informative. Been very informative. So thank you so much. Listen, if you know someone struggling with an addiction and are searching for answers, visit us at landmarkrecovery.com to learn more about substance abuse programs that are both saving lives and empowering families. And until next week, I'm Zach Crouch with Landmark Recovery Radio, wishing you well. Hi, I'm Zach Crouch, and you're listening to Landmark Recovery Radio, your source for addiction and recovery news and knowledge. You can find us online wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe to get the most up-to-date information from leading experts. We have guest, Dr. Theodora Saddoris, joining us on the show today. Dr. Saddorisis is board certified in addiction medicine through the American Board of Preventive Medicine, and she is a fellow of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. She's been providing addiction treatment in Columbus, Indiana since January of 2014. She's very active in her community, from providing weekly therapy sessions to the public to helping people find recovery housing options for those in need. She's currently writing a book on addiction recovery, and she's joining us today to talk about the family ties of alcoholism. Dr. Saddoris, thank you so much for coming on the show with us today.
Oh, I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So in your practice there in Columbus, do you have people coming to you knowing they have a problem, or do you have a lot of people who have some ambivalence even about being able to control their drinking?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I mean, currently, because I'm only treating addiction, everybody that sees me, they admitting they have a problem. But before that, when I was treating both internal medicine and also addiction, I had a lot of people that were having struggles even thinking they even had a problem. And I think anything in medicine, you have to learn from your mistakes. And believe me, I've made my share of them, so.
Right. We all have.
Yes, that's true. And I think my biggest mistakes that I've made is, when I would ask a patient and say, are you an alcoholic, or do you drink too much? And immediately that put the person defensive. They felt I was judging them. And naturally, they didn't think they drank that much because all their drinking buddies drank about the same. So, it wasn't helpful for anybody. And I was very, I've been fortunate if they'd even come back and see me after that encounter. So what I did find that was so helpful is that I tried to focus on health. And so what I asked them is, how many do you drink at the most in one day? And how much do you typically drink in a week's time? And again, another big mistake I had to learn is, what size is a drink? I had a relative ask me, is it okay if I have just a glass of wine every night to help reduce the risk of heart problems? And yes, low alcohol has been proven to have some benefit with that. So I said, sure. And when I went to visit him, I saw that he got one of those bottles of wine and poured it into one of those 64-ounce big gulp styrofoam cups. And that was his.
You said
glass.
A drink, right?
Yeah, it was his drink, right? And so I think that so we have to standardize what is a drink, so we're all on the same boat, on that. So
That's funny.
So a standard drink is considered 14 grams of alcohol, which is equal to 12 ounces of regular beer. If it's fortified, that's about 1.5 drinks. And it's like 5 ounces of wine. But if it's fortified, it's again about 1.5 drinks. And then 1.5 ounces of brandy or 80 proof alcohol. So once I clarify what that drink is, then I ask them, how much are you drinking? And that helps so much because then I can explain to them the amount of their drinking, how it's affecting their body.
Yeah.
So I usually tell them if you're drinking about 60 grams a day, which is a little about 4 drinks a day, that in 10 years' time in men and about 8 years' time in women, that they have an increased risk of liver cirrhosis and 5 times increased risk of liver cancer. And then for those who drink about 2 drinks a day, they have an increased risk of cancer of the esophagus. And this is something that's just recently been found out, is that women who drink 1 drink a day, they have an increased risk of breast cancer. And so the current recommendations that they want to keep people at is to help them to reduce the potential risk. So for like women and for men that are over 65, they should never drink more than 3 drinks in one day and no more than 7 in a week. And then for men, they shouldn't drink more than 4 in one day and no more than 14 in a week. And so when we focus on that, reduces defensiveness, we're working on trying to improve health. But I always state to them, if they're having struggles of reducing their intake, and I said this is a common problem because your brain is used to a certain amount and it can make it difficult to reduce, that we have medications to help you with that.
Well, I have a question just to follow up on that. I'm curious to know how your patients, when they hear that information about, increased risk of you said cancer, cirrhosis, number one, how do they take it? And number two, I want to mention something. I was doing a recent just sort of search on vaping and cigarettes, because vaping and cigarettes are pretty common here in the state of Kentucky. And the thing that's interesting about nicotine is that it hits the part of the brain when you smoke it, snuff it, or whatever you do with it, dip or whatever. Nicotine has the effect of telling the brain when you ingest it that there's nothing wrong, that it turns that part of the brain off. So it's just like, yeah, I know these are bad for me, but the minute that I light up, it's like that stuff gets forgotten, and that's amazing. So I'm curious to hear from you. How do your patients react, or do they take it in when they hear that, and do they change when they hear about the increased risk?
I find that they seem to be a little bit alarmed about it, and then we're not so much pushing abstinence as we are health, and and so a lot of times I also have liver enzyme showing that there's been some liver enzyme elevations and maybe showing some abnormalities and showing that it's affecting their health. And it's kind of like the person who doesn't want to quit smoking, but once they have a heart attack, it's like, whoa, I got to
wake up call.
Yeah, so if they can see that there is definitely a problem happening to them, then it seems like I get more cooperation. And we have it in a non-judgmental way, in a way that helps them realize that I'm here to help them improve their health. So I'm not judging them that you're a bad person, you're an alcoholic, or put a label on them. Yeah. And, of course, all labels do is just make people feel worse and not want to change, so. And in terms of the smoking, that's just part of the addiction process, regardless of what it is. The craving's intense, and once you have what you want, you know that that's going to relieve it. And so it doesn't matter what's going on or how bad it's for you. You just want to relieve whatever the withdrawal symptoms are giving you. So that's common with any drug. So.
I also want to come back to, you mentioned you prior to treating addiction full time, you did some work as a internist, and an interesting thing for me I've come across in my time with doctors, internal medicine doctors, PCP folk, is that many of those providers don't know how or don't feel comfortable having a conversation about substance use disorder, maybe because they aren't trained on it, et cetera. What's been your experience?
Oh, that is very true. And I think it's a hard topic to bring up, just out of the blue like that. So I think what I find to be very helpful is sometimes I might have a the staff gives them a questionnaire and asks if they don't mind filling it out, and it's usually an audit questionnaire that talks about how many drinks you drink in a day or a week, or do you find that you're having problems with it, or you're having trouble with relationships. I mean, basically giving you an idea of how is alcohol affecting them. And so when I see them, I always ask for permission. Is it okay if I go over this questionnaire with you? And I haven't had anybody tell me no. And then and then we go over it, and then that's a great stepping stone into discussion for their health. Because I can tell right off the bat how much they're drinking right there.
Yeah. When you work with people, do you often connect that there's an issue that runs in their family pretty often?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the general statistics for alcohol use is anywhere genetically between 40 to 60%. But what I find to be amazing is that, when you have a father that is an alcoholic and you're their son, it seems to be more inherited on the male side. There's a 70% chance of developing alcoholism. And so that is a huge potential. So I always tell people, if there's a family history, don't touch the alcohol, because your brain is not going to respond like other people's brain to it.
And when you come across these folks that you're seeing who have alcoholism running their family, how far back have you seen it go? Is this one generation, two, or yeah?
Multiple. I've seen uncles and I've seen grandfathers and great grandfathers. Yes, sure. It can go far. Brothers, cousins. Yeah, it can be in multiple people.
It seems like a huge. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Occasionally there's an outlier where somebody doesn't have an alcohol problem, but instead they have an opiate problem instead, Mm-hmm. So sometimes what we're finding, it's not necessarily specifically to one drug. It can cross to other drugs,
Sure.
This tendency,
One other processes too. I'm sure there's multiple ways that the addictive brain can get satisfied. It's interesting. I go back to one of my first. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and one of my first supervisors told me, something like marijuana. Marijuana is a very interesting drug substance because it affects people in such different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, get a lot of energy. Some people feel lethargic. Some people feel paranoid. It depends on when you started. It depends on how long, et cetera, like many drugs. But it's interesting because marijuana is becoming more mainstream now. It's becoming a lot more accepted, like alcohol was, after Prohibition. What do you see as some of the risks with THC being more mainstream?
I think the biggest problem that we have with it is that there isn't any clinical trials with that, And, a lot of people say, well, it helps with pain, it does this or that or the other. And I think a lot of the claims are bogus claims. There are a few types of pain that have been shown to be helpful.
But no clinical trials for that either?
No, really. There are some studies out, but they're not very large. It's more anecdotal,
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So we really need to get into large studies. I think the biggest problem is that because it's legalized in a lot of states, we're going to start seeing some huge problems. And one of them is that there are some people that have a tendency, if they smoke marijuana, that it can throw them into developing schizophrenia. And I have personally seen that with a lot of patients. So there's that increased risk. And I know the mental hospitals in Colorado has dramatically increased. I have a sister that lives in Colorado, and there's a big problem. I think the other big problem is mixing alcohol and marijuana together. The alcohol impairs judgment, and the marijuana impairs their ability to tell distance and things like that, and they have a slow reaction. And sometimes they can overcome that by concentrating really hard. But if they're drinking alcohol, that impairs their concentration. So even at low doses of alcohol, they can have severe impairment of their driving. And so there's a lot more accidents, a lot more fatalities and injuries that they've encountered. So I think that it's sad that they legalize something that hasn't been studied, to see its long-term effects.
It definitely gives me some pause.
It's just like vaping, and then they find all these lung people and dying, and it's like, we approve things and then we later regret them,
So I'm curious to know, do you also see people, Dr. Saddoris, who are younger, teenage, even at 17, 18-year-olds?
It gets a little challenging. 18-year-olds not an issue. When you get younger than that, then there's parental, how do we handle parental consent, and how much do we release information? And then it comes to, well, if you're doing something that's dangerous, I have to let your mother or father know, and dangerous if they tell me that they're drinking and driving, I have to let them know, because that's a very dangerous combination. But so I don't have a lot of patients that are younger, although I don't restrict them. I think part of it is that most treatments are more mental health type treatments, which is sad because a lot of them need medication. And they don't want to give medicine to a younger person. But yet at the same time, the younger the person has the addiction, the longer it takes for them to recover than if they developed it at an older age. And so I think they have a failed knowledge that when you start young, you're going to have a severe problem for a long time. And that's when you need to be aggressive and not sit there and fiddle around with, let's go talk about it. Well, as a teenager, they're not going to talk to you,
Right. No,
and as a therapist, you understand that whole thing,
Well, and that's part of the reason I asked the question about if you do treat younger folks is, and I'll keep it at 18 to, let's just say 22, because they are certainly still in that range. I think they're probably more versed in the ability to argue for marijuana's validity. And for parents out there and people who have, those folks in their family, how do you have a conversation with those folks, those younger people who are really making strong arguments and they sound really valid for a marijuana use?
I think when it comes to marijuana, unfortunately, it's not been studied. So a lot of their arguments are, they'll see one little claim that's on YouTube saying that this is great, it helped reduce my PTSD. Well, there's not really been any studies showing improvement in PTSD, any kind of stress-induced problems. And I think we have to recognize that do we believe everything that's on the internet that people claim,
Right.
And so I think clinical studies would really help tremendously. People forget that marijuana, especially now, is not the same as it was even 40 years ago. The amount of THC is so concentrated. And when it's so concentrated, the cannabinol, which is the part that helps offset some of the hazards of THC, is significantly reduced. And so we're seeing so much psychosis and so many other negative effects. It's almost like a stimulant now. And it's just not the same drug as what it was even back in the 1960s when people, smoked marijuana. So some people say, well, it's in the Bible. Well, yeah, but what was its dose of THC back then versus now with genetic
engineering? There's a lot of things in
engineering?
the Bible that we probably shouldn't do today, too.
Yeah, well, even if it was, it's just not the same. When we genetically engineer a plant, it's just no longer the same properties as what it was before.
Yeah. So it kind of begs the question for me. We talked a little about the alcoholism running in multi-generations of families. In your research and in your studies, have you found, is there an alcoholism or substance use gene, so to speak?
No, there is not one specific gene that causes alcoholism or any type of addiction. But what our finding is there are different segments on multiple genes that have an effect in making a person more susceptible to addiction. And so some of the things specific to alcoholism is that they have some genes that affect how the alcohol is broke down and eliminated from the body. There's also areas that affect how alcohol
Which
affects
is
their brain.
Native Americans have that gene. Is that correct?
Yeah. Asians have trouble with breaking it down, and so they don't tend to have an alcohol problem. But Americans don't don't have that issue. But the biggest thing is that a lot of people that have a family history of alcoholism, that when they first take their alcoholic drink, they aren't getting drunk like their fellow people. Okay,
Right.
They don't seem to have the effect, so they already have an automatic tolerance. So they have to drink a whole lot more to get that tolerance, and because they're drinking a whole lot more, they're getting a much quicker dependent on it than their fellow people. So there are some definite changes there. There's also some genes that affect stress reduction. We call that the GABA receptors because they're the ones that help relax you. And I find that there's changes in that, like people that have a family history of alcoholism, like the women, they seem to, when they take a benzo like a Xanax or an Ativan or a Klonopin, instead of relaxing them, it actually gives them increased energy. So they have kind of a reverse effect. And it makes them more susceptible to addiction to benzos.
Right.
And then the most recent one that I find to be rather exciting is the serotonin receptor changes. Serotonin is causes something that's called impulsivity, which means a person is always, doing things and not thinking of the consequences. And I kind of liken it to a person driving 100 miles an hour and they have no brakes.
Right.
They're always taking risk. They're always getting into trouble. And so they have found that blocking that serotonin receptor that has significantly improved reduction of alcohol use in those who have that genetic tendency. So I think what's exciting about this is because there are multiple areas, we might get to the point that we could actually map out a patient to find out where their genetics are and what it is and what specific treatment would be for those specific problems of changes in their brain. I think that is going to be coming in the future, and I think that sounds to be an exciting new form of treatment that can be very effective for those who have those issues.
Sort of genome-based treatment?
Yes, genome-based treatment, exactly right.
And I'm curious to know as well from you if in your experience and study of the genetic piece, if you've seen, can you explain a little bit about the epigenetics factors and how those, I was thinking about trauma and how that can also catapult someone into it.
I think a lot of people have struggled with epigenetics. I think even as a physician who was studying epigenetics was like, wow, this doesn't make sense. Because epigenetics is that the genes or sequence is the same. So nothing has changed on that. But what we fail to realize is the body has built-in ways to have us adapt to our environment. And they do that by adding certain proteins to the gene sequences. So it hasn't changed its sequence, but it changes the way it twists or configures itself. So when it twists, it can have certain areas of the gene transcribe certain proteins or prevent certain proteins from being produced. And so when someone has had a lot of trauma in their life or a lot of what we call adverse childhood experiences, that these changes can be permanently in their life, but it can also be passed on to future generations. And I think that part is like, wow, we used to think, is it environment or is it our genes? And what we're finding is both are inherited, okay? And so, so a person, your great-grandfather who maybe had suffered severe problems is now affecting you and how you respond to stress and how you respond to problems and how you cope with things. And I always remember the statement, every generation seems to be worse than the previous one, and now you kind of know why.
Sure.
Because you carry our baggage with us genetically.
Well, and thank God for the things that we have now today in the clinical world, like to help with dealing with some of those traumatic experiences. EMDR being the first that comes to mind, and that wasn't the case, 100 years ago, certainly.
No. How do we handle those changes and find better coping mechanisms, and that takes time and practice and a skilled therapist who understands how to do those.
Mm. So in your practice, what would you say the two types of alcohol use disorders you see are in patients, and how does treatment differ between the two of them?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that when we treat alcoholism, getting through the acute withdrawal part, I don't really stress because there's so many protocols out. But, the big thing is how do we stay off of alcohol? And I think assessing how does the alcohol use patterns helps me determine potential treatments. So they have type 1, which is type 1 or class A. And that typically is a later onset of starting alcohol and later problems. Usually after age 25, they start drinking more heavily. And around their 30s or 40, they really start having some issues, relationship problems, work-related problems. And it's a more slow progression. They don't tend to be novelty-seeking, and they have less fighting. And so we find that in women and then also in older men seem to respond to what we call SSRIs, which is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, such as Paxil, Zoloft, Prozac, Celexa. Those class of medications seem to be very helpful in a fair number of people, suggesting maybe there's a component of depression that might be contributing to some of that. And then the type 2 is the one that is inherited. They start at a very young age with very heavy drinking. A lot of times they're also taking other multiple drugs with it. They are really impulsive, risk-taking. They always want to seek something to do something new and exciting. There might be a lot of violence involved. And this is the serotonin blockers that really help that. And they've had a lot of studies on Zofran, and I've used Zofran a lot and has had great success in reducing the cravings. I have a lot of people say yes. The one guy said, "Oh, I didn't think it was helping me that much because I was doing great. I didn't think I needed it." A week or two later, he started drinking again, and he says, "I need to be back on it." So it does definitely have a big influence on people to help them with that. But I think most importantly is that, we also need to assess what other treatments that we need to help them reduce their cravings. And the FDA has 3 approved treatments out. The disulfiram, which is antabuse.
Right.
I don't personally use that. The only studies that I have really seen that have been beneficial, and you probably have encountered this being a family therapist, is that if you have a couple and they're undergoing family therapy and they have written abstinence agreements, and the one member that doesn't drink is making sure that that person's taking their antabuse every day, that has been shown to be successful. But just writing them a prescription for antabuse, most likely they don't take it, or if they do take it, they get severely ill from it and they don't want to take it again, right?
Well, it kind of, to your point, it comes back to this idea of addiction being a family disease, where the people who maybe weren't drinking are also, I'm going to use maybe some, controversial vernacular here, but they've been infected by the disease, so to speak, right? They've been around the person who's been using for weeks, months, years at this point, and their way of dealing with the dysfunction has been dysfunctional. So they have to now learn a different way of living, which tips and off balances the entire dynamic of the family. So readjusting, recalibrating that dynamic does take time, and it takes work. So to your point, it's not just the addict or alcoholic, the substance user who's in recovery.
Oh, definitely. And I think the family a lot of times struggles because they say it's their problem and they don't realize how they're contributing to that problem. And
Absolutely.
they have to relearn how to communicate with each other in an effective way without the
Hmm.
judgment and all the other
Hmm.
things. And so, yes, I think family therapy in that setting is very helpful. But otherwise, I don't find the anti-abuse has been helpful. The Camprosate, it's Camprol, is also an FDA-approved drug, and that has been shown in European studies to help reduce the recurrence of increases abstinence. They have not seen that to be so in the United States study. They did a huge study, and it didn't really show it to be any more benefit than 12 steps or something like
Hmm.
that. Um, I think part of it is you got to take it 3 times a day. And to be honest with you,
Wow.
anytime you have someone take something more than once a day, it's really a struggle, for
Sure
people to be
is.
consistent. And then, of course, naltrexone, which has been proven to be
Hmm.
superior to all the treatments. They did a big study called the Combined Study, and I love that name because it means that they truly did combine all kinds of modalities. They
Mm.
combine, a lot of motivational enhancement therapy. They combine cognitive behavior therapy, which is kind of associating how your thoughts affect your emotions and how those things can affect your behaviors.
Hmm.
Um, they've also done a lot of assessments with that, and also in combination with the um, antabuse, the camprosate, and naltrexone in different combinations. And what they found is naltrexone alone, with medical management, just seeing the doctor, seeing how you're doing,
Right.
showing an interest, has been superior to any of the other combinations. And the camprosate was found to be no different than going to 12 steps. Um, so, um, so I think that the biggest problem with naltrexone, though, is that if a person is taking opioids, that is an opioid blocker,
Hmm.
and so you're going to throw them into severe withdrawal. So you can't use it in that population.
If they
But
can't get past the withdrawal part, the 10 days or so that they need to be opiate free, right?
well, sometimes they need a lot longer than that,
Yeah.
depending on
Especially if
the
they're on
opioids
methadone.
that they're taking, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe heroin, which is short acting, but
Yeah.
there's some long acting ones. They might be a lot longer,
Yeah.
and so that makes it a real struggle.
Sure.
But it does definitely reduce cravings and increase frequency and reduce heavy drinking days. But it kind of uncouples the pleasure that you get from
Hmm.
drinking from the
Hmm.
actual act, because
I love
it's a
that word,
learning.
uncouples. That's a great
Mhm,
way to put it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's a learned behavior in part, and so you're kind of unlearning that behavior on an unconscious level. And then I'd like to address the protracted withdrawal syndrome. I think we get people off their alcohol. They're doing, relatively okay for, a couple months. They're still struggling a lot. They're having, restless sleep, likely to get in a couple hours of sleep. They're having severe nightmares because they're trying to catch up on the REM that they lost with the drinking.
Hmm.
They're very irritable. They're very anxious. They have a lot of mood swings. They can't stand being around themselves. Nobody can stand being around them either.
Right.
You know, and sometimes they get to the point they just can't stand it any longer and drink just so they can get some sleep. And so for those people that are having that protracted withdrawal, because the sleep disturbance can last a year, and that's a long time to go with not sleeping, right?
God.
And but they found gabapentin has been very beneficial in significantly reducing that. And I've had a lot of people that have done phenomenally well by giving them gabapentin. Usually you need at least 300 milligrams 3 times a day, or 400 milligrams 3 times a day, trying to get them a high enough dose. A lot of people give them way too low of a dose. It doesn't really help them at that level.
Got it.
And so that helps. And then there's all these atypicals that are not FDA approved, but it's been beneficial. A lot of certain anticonvulsants. But the biggest one we mentioned was that Zofran, that blocker, and the antidepressants. And
Mm-hmm.
I do want to talk about one treatment that I have found to be very helpful, and it's called the
Sure.
Sinclair method. This is where we have people that they want to reduce their alcohol intake, and they maybe like to get more control over their alcohol intake, but they don't really want to go through the withdrawal. Because the biggest problem with withdrawal, with people constantly, wanting to get off and then restarting, wanting to get
Mm-hmm.
off, restarting, is every time the withdrawal becomes worse and worse and worse.
Right.
And it can get to the point where they can start having seizures and what we call DTs, and they can actually 10% die from it. So, and I think a good 80% of alcoholics that are in this category, I really don't want to stop, but I would like to have less intake for health. And so,
Right.
so what the Sinclair method is that you give them naltrexone, but not in the morning. You have them take it like an hour before they normally would start drinking. So, and usually it's either 50 to 100 milligrams. And what it is they take it in the morning. By the time the evening happens, it's too weak. So when you're giving it to them, so it gives them the maximum blocking of the pleasure that they get from it.
Okay.
And what they find is in about 3 months, they have about a 10% reduction of alcohol intake, which doesn't sound that impressive, but in 3 years, they've had 80% abstinence.
Yeah.
And the other 20% significant reduction. And I have one guy that, he was drinking 3/5 of alcohol every night.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and so right now he's down to 1/5 of alcohol a night after about 3 months. And so what we do is we just gradually start reducing the amount. He has no protracted withdrawal because he's not going cold turkey. He's
Sure.
not having any withdrawal symptoms. And sometimes as we get lower, if they have a family member that can just put out, this is how much you can have a drink for a night. You can only have 6 beers, and they just leave that out. And then we work on their thinking, like just because one night you didn't drink all 6, you can't then decide you're going to save those 2 and drink the extra the next day, right?
Right.
This is your maximum that you can have per day, And then every month and as we get closer to lower doses, we prolong it out to every couple months or 3 months of slowly declining the amount that they consume. And a lot of times they're cutting back themselves, but what they're seeing is success. I mean, when I said, wow, that is fantastic. You have dropped from 2 of those fifths a night down to just 1,
Yeah.
from 3 to 1. And he says, wow, that really made a difference. Someone that you mentioned that to me. And I said, yes, this is progress. You
It
got
sure
to be
is.
very happy with yourself. And, I think the biggest problem is that a lot of treatment providers have it, this is the way it is, it's my way or the highway, and naturally they're going to leave, right? Because you're not meeting them where they're at and where they want their goals to be. And even if this person never drops down less than that, he's definitely in better health than if he was at the other dosage, And so that's why I see treatment is that it has to be individualized. We have to have shared goals that we kind of communicate and we discuss and we negotiate. I had one guy that says, well, I'm going to go from the fortified beer down to the regular beer because I'm drinking 5 drinks, and I thought I'd drop down to 4. And I said, I don't think that's a good idea because you're dropping down a significant amount of alcohol intake per beer. Why don't we keep the same amount of 5 but at a lower strength? And I explained why. And so we're in kind of contract negotiation every time we see, and it's mutually discussed, and so that we both are on the same page, and that way, I'm just trying to slow him down so that he doesn't have a failure and then give up,
Yeah. And it sounds like the patient's more bought in, I think, to the process.
They are bought into the treatment because they are actively engaging what I think I can do. And if they say, Doc, I don't think I'm ready to cut back, I said, that's perfectly okay. Let's go ahead and see you back in another month and see how things are going,
Are there instances where you think that method wouldn't be effective, like certain substances or rates of use, things like that, anything like that?
Well, I don't recommend that for somebody who's already successful with abstinence, okay? I wouldn't say, well, you can go back and drink and we'll go do this. No, that's never good, okay?
No.
If you're doing fine with what you are and where you're at, do that. But for somebody who just doesn't want to really stop or have had such failures that they're so discouraged, this is a way of getting them to try, but we try it in a gradual way.
Mm-hmm.
And they can see success, and they start building confidence,
Mm-hmm.
and they start seeing hope, okay? Because hope is so critical in recovery.
Yeah.
And that's what I always try to instill in people, hope. We can do this. We can adjust it. It's no big deal. If it's going slower than you think, we'll eventually get there. It doesn't matter if it takes us a year or 5 years, we're going to be there, okay? And so, we just slow little steps, build up to big steps, so.
Absolutely. Well, and I can see also how it cuts back on some of the ambivalence. A lot of people who have, problems with substances come in with, I kind of want to change. I should, maybe I can, maybe I can't. And that's interesting. I'll have to take a further look at that, Dr. Saddoris. So that's great.
Yeah. The Sinclair method, yeah. I mean, for a lot of people that are abstinents, this is the only way to treat alcoholism. They hate that. But, they're missing 80% of people,
Right.
So our goal is, we take people where they're at and we just try to improve them, for health, to make them so that their health-wise is doing better and their life is better and they have less struggles in the relationships.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show with us today. I really do appreciate this.
Oh, well, it was such a pleasure. And if you ever need me again, I'll be more than happy to go on other topics. Like I said, I treat all kinds of addictions.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you know someone struggling with an addiction and are searching for answers, visit us at landmarkrecovery.com to learn more about substance abuse programs that are both saving lives and empowering families. And until next week, I'm Zach Crouch with Landmark Recovery Radio.
Thank you for tuning in to Recovery Radio. New content for this program is available every Tuesday at 12 noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time, with all episodes available on demand on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel and through our content partners, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Google Play podcasts. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review so we can continue to create quality content to help save 1 million lives in the next 100 years. You don't need to struggle through addiction alone. Live the life you dreamed on the road to recovery.